All right. Plan weekly meeting, June the 8th, 2022. Both items are read-only, really. Kushal's not here, but it seems like there's a lot of feedback on this item, so I wonder, should we go ahead and talk about it anyway? Probably.
I mean, I'm game to have a quick conversation, though we do have a full call after this to deep dive on any specific issues
Right.
come up from this, but I'm happy to.
Sure. Okay, cool. So I'll verbalize for Kushal, and then all the participants in the discussion are here anyway. Okay, so removing requirements and test cases from the issue list. When we moved to view issues list and started using GraphQL to fetch the issues list, both requirements and test cases started showing up, along with regular issues and incidents. All four of these types are issuable objects. GraphQL query to fetch the issues list supports a types filter, which can accept an array of enums to determine what to include in the list. As per our documentation, incidents can show up in the list. Both test cases and requirements do not support all the features of an issuable, and if a user tries to open these from the issue list, they're incorrectly rendered with the legacy issues view. Requirements showing up in issues list is clearly a bug and is being fixed. So his question is, do we want to show test cases in the issue list? If yes, do we have to update the link URL to point at the actual test case page, which is under a different URL in a different view, to render it correctly? And in his opinion, we should not show test cases within issues, as test cases do not support commenting and only support labels. Jan.
I mean, I think, I know Gabe has some thoughts here too, so I don't want to step on his toes, but I think the long-term goal would be to get an ability to view all work items in a single place, if people desired that. But I think in addition to that, there'll need to be a way to directly jump to whatever work item they're looking for. And that can be through pre-set up filters or save filters. That could be through an item in the left-hand nav bar. I don't really know what that's going to look like. I think we're trying to figure out the best option there because we don't want to clutter the nav bar with everything. But on the flip side, if you're trying to work on requirements and you want to jump to requirements, you don't want to have to spend, all this time clicking around and filtering and all this stuff. I think in the meantime, though, you're absolutely correct. The issue we ran into for those people who aren't aware is, since requirements show up in the issues list, it's really nice. You can go and add labels. So you kind of get that feature for free that we've always kind of wanted. And John did a great job and went out and added some labels to issue or to test requirements, and it was great. But one of our customers did the same thing. It was like, oh, I can just close it. And they closed it. Well, now it's in the state that you can't recover from because the requirement itself doesn't support closing. So if you go to the requirements view, it's just gone. It doesn't show up in the closed status. It's just forever gone. They couldn't figure out how to get it back. So that's where we're running into problems, is these incompatibilities. So I think in the short term, you're absolutely correct. We should split requirements out, and test cases are probably in the same boat because we can see the writing on the wall. If we do it there, we're going to have the same issue. And as we migrate all of these toward the common underlying architecture, and we have better checks in place to ensure that the actions shown in the issue view are the correct actions for the underlying type, then we can probably talk about how we want to bring them back together. But that's my thought. I'm open to discussion.
I think I had the next point and same thing, so we can skip mine. The only thing that I was thinking about is that once we do have everything in the same place, and let's say we want to get rid of the URL for requirements or for test cases or whatever, we're going to have to support redirects to the new URL at some point, which also is in line with something that we want to do long-term with work items, which is properly handle moving them. So I'm not sure where we want to fit that into the workflow, but instead of right now, when you move an issue, it closes the issue and creates a copy of it. I think we want to move to a place where we don't close and we just actually move it while keeping it open. So I'll let the engineers weigh on if or when that's important to do. That's just the only thought I had.
I cannot stress from a product perspective enough how important it will be when we finally fix this, because this causes no end of customer questions, confusion, consternation, and problems on customer calls. We're like, wait, I moved it. Why do I still have a closed issue over here? I didn't want to close it. I'm like, you didn't close it. You closed the copy. Like, you closed the old one and opened a new one. And they're like, well, why? Why do I have a closed issue now? And it's like this huge thing. So yeah, I understand why we don't do it now, but customers are going to love when we don't do it.
It also causes some really unpleasant edge cases in things like Service Desk, where the the conversation continues to come in on the closed issue, and people comment on the moved issue and think that people are seeing their comments and they're not. So it's like, yes, it's painful, these strange edge cases. Yeah, and we actually skipped your comment. Do you want to add?
Yeah, I just linked old discussion when I was asking the similar question. I agree with what was already said, and longer term it makes sense to me to list all together. If a short term we filter out some of items on the issue list, are we talking only about issue index page, or do you expect some further extraction of specific types on other places?
What do you mean by that?
For example, in dropdowns or some auto-completion, quick actions and stuff like this, or referencing in our markdown.
So I think the bug here was specifically around issues list page. But yeah, now that you mentioned about the other places where we have auto completion, specifically in places like related issues, there I think we go by the symbol where we provide the number. But it would be interesting to see like what would happen if I use hash as a symbol, and then I provide the number which points to a test case or a requirement and not an issue. Then in that case, would it still show the results in autocomplete? And if it does show it, then clicking on add, what would happen? I mean, Felipe would know better because he worked on test cases back in. And the idea was to keep them as issuables. It is just that we wouldn't support all the attributes from the sidebar, like assignees, due dates, weight, etc. And with regards to test cases, we only supported labels, and even discussions weren't supported. But if you open test cases from the issues list, then you can see the entire UI for commenting and then starting discussions. And it does allow you to add comments there. It doesn't fail anywhere because underlying object supports it. But then it's not correct, because if user visits the same test case from the CI/CD URL of the test case, then we don't show any commenting UI there. So it would only confuse user as long as we keep showing test cases within the issues list. Same thing goes for auto completion. I think I'm not sure whether REST API does support providing types filter, but everywhere where we are using GraphQL to fetch issues list, a types filter can be utilized. So we can at least mitigate those places and make sure that we are only filtering the results and include the issues and incidents and nothing else. But for REST API, I don't think it has any sort of types filter present there.
Yeah, cool, thanks. I think that it will make sense to the action item from this to verify a backend on what all places we filter out some specific type from this issue listing, because I know we do this at least on the index page, but I remember that it was not perfect at all. And for example, on API and somewhere else, all issue types were listed anyway. So I believe that this is not thorough or complete isolation, and some action will be probably needed.
I was also going to add one thing that we're doing with tasks, because tasks had the same problem where you could, if from the list view, it would open up into the issue URL and the issue detail page. And I think one of the things that we're doing with tasks that hopefully is done by the freeze for this release, so we can make tasks generally available, is having them render the new work item URL. And so not just from the list view, but also from places like profiles, where there's your activity feed, basically anywhere in the application that you can click into or have the URL for this thing present, which would also be references. I think Mario is planning on updating the links attributes in the REST API with the point to the correct URLs. Could be not remembering correctly. But we could also take the same approach with requirements and test cases. Once we have the widgets for the various objects. You can use the same approach to more or less render them in the new work item UI. And that way they won't have labels or like all the things that they shouldn't have on them yet, if that makes sense. So we don't have to wait, down to your point, John, on 5. I don't know if we have to wait till we have, oh, you did say it includes all the widgets work item supports. Anyway, it could be a good way to fast follow with those other 2 objects, solve the same problem.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So like the 3 criteria would include like that this new work item view. So say for requirements just have, off the top of my head, I think title, description, status, right? Like archived or not, or satisfied or not, and then they can be archived. So as soon as the new work item view supports like those 4 widgets, let's say, then we can start rendering requirements as work items. Until then, sorry, go on, Kushal.
Sorry, go ahead. I'll finish.
Yeah, so I just think that should be one of the criteria, and the other ones being that we can filter them out somehow if people want to, and then thirdly that it makes sense, right? Like I don't know if having things ever in the issues list makes sense, with the possible exception of things that act very like issues, like incidents. I think that I'm always going to want to see my requirements separately, and possibly always see test cases within that context. And I just don't know, like a single work items view I think makes a lot of sense, especially while we're developing this, because we had this problem before, but that tasks would be orphaned. Well, if you have a work items list that you can filter, they're never orphaned because you can always dig through that list and find them. So from that point of view, it makes sense. But then I also think there are other parts of the application where I'm just never going to want to see requirements and issues side by side, for example.
Yeah, so regarding work items, I don't think we really need to worry about how the work item view needs to treat the data, because by design, it basically supports all the widgets that are going to be provided by GraphQL response. So the way work item queries were developed was that it would basically bring the widget information from the backend. So the view is not aware before making the query that what are the widgets it is going to expect. And based on the GraphQL response that we get from the backend, we determine what widgets to mount and show on UI. So work item can basically act as a bare bones shell where it would basically wait for the response to come, and then it would dynamically mount all the relevant widgets which are part of that particular work item. So I think that problem won't be affecting work items in general. It is just that issues have been a legacy feature, and all the views which render issues are defined in a way that they have certain expectations, like what kind of data to show there. So if the data is not available, it basically bars. But with regards to work items, we don't have to worry about it. Like all the widgets will be present there.
But is that even true at the minute? Like, I mean, are they just the existing components that we have for the issues page? Because like surely the new work item view just only at the minute just seems to support enough for tasks. So like title and I don't know what else. Maybe that's it. Closer.
Yeah. So if I understand again, Natalia and probably Flory and anyone else who worked extensively on work item front end would know it better. But based on the limited front end work that I did on work items, the way it works is that, so for today, for example, if you have issues query developed today with regards to work items, where it would bring in all the information for issues in a work item style API response, then it would show the title and description of issues, and it would not include any other widget because the widget is not implemented yet. So as we go on and add new widget types for work items, and if those widget types are also supported by these issuable objects, then they would get included in the API response, and then front end would take care of it.
Cool. Yeah. So that's just what I meant. And the second point was that, like, if you returned a requirement as a work item, I don't think it would show that like requirements have a special status, satisfied or not, or how they're satisfied manually or automatically and so on. So I don't think that would render yet. So it doesn't make sense to me to like render them in the issue list as a work item, because the view doesn't support it. Moreover, if you render them actually as an issue, you get the issue that this customer is complaining about. And now I'm actually worried that like if we take this away, customers are now used to adding labels to their requirements, and they'll ask, why can't I add labels to requirements anymore? I could do this last milestone and now I can't. And well, it's because like you were also able to close the requirement, which was something we never wanted to do. And so this is really a regression, you know.
So for self-manage, I don't think we'll ever know, but at least for GitLab.com, we can ask someone from the site reliability team to at least run a query on production DB to at least know that of all the existing requirements across GitLab.com, what requirements have labels assigned to it, because those are essentially corrupted objects. And if there are too many of those, then I think we have a bigger problem to tackle than just hiding requirements there.
Yeah, so that kind of brings it back to Gabe's point. So we've got a choice here. We can either show requirements within the issue list and have requirements linked to the requirements URL, similar to what we're doing with tasks currently. In that tasks are just going to the work items URL, and then issues go to the issue URL. Or the other option is to have what we did before and just filter out requirements from the issue list.
I mean, long term, the end goal here is to have requirements have URLs and to go to that page instead of going to the requirement page. That's where we want to end up, right? I mean, I think we all agree that's the long-term goal. How we display them in what list is something we need to figure out specifics, but long-term, we're deprecating the slide out requirements drawer in favor of a URL-based requirement navigation scheme, is my understanding. With that being said, I think we have two choices to move forward with. Right now, we have that working in addition to the requirements drawer. So we could just disable the requirements drawer and have that point to a filtered list of issues pared down to requirements only, and then figure out how to disable the close button, which is causing us grief. Or we can turn off that functionality in the short term, keep the drawer alive, and plan an actual migration in a release or two where we do the migration correctly and move everybody over. We're kind of like in between right now. So I'm open to either option, but I think it's important to know where we want to go to figure out the best plan to get there.
Yeah, gotcha. Sorry, I got requirements and test cases confused. In that requirements, we do not have their own separate URL yet. So I think for now we should remove requirements from the issue list view until they have their own URLs, and then we can figure out what the next steps.
You can get to them through the list view that way.
But then it'll
copies of them. So every requirement is put in two places right now, if I'm understanding things correctly. One is in a normal issuable type item, and one is in the requirements database. We're trying to deprecate the requirements database and have everything move over at some point. It's just we haven't pulled the trigger to do the migration yet. So what you're actually interacting with are two separate things, which is what's causing us grief right now. So my point is we can either jump all in on the mistake we have, for lack of a better term, and just jump right over and say, okay, this is what we're doing in 15.2, or we can backpedal and then plan a migration that's a little bit less forced.
Okay, sorry, but what when you say it has its own page, but it doesn't have its own URL. It's still going to you can go to the issues URL and throw in a requirements ID and see the requirement, correct? You can't go to /requirement/ID. No,
it's under issues ID and you end up viewing the requirement.
Okay, so then, yeah, I think we should filter today until we fix that problem. That's going to be more effort, I think, to get requirements, its own requirements view outside of the requirements list view.
It's also worth saying, like, the drawer for requirements is really nice. I don't know if we want to do a drawer or modal for work items, but also just so future thinking, you should be able to open up a work item from the list view and without leaving the list view, like whether it's modal or drawer or whatever UX wants to do. So that's just also something that we want to do. The reason why we have to have the dedicated page is for those weird times where you give somebody a direct link or something's in your profile, or like you still need to have that like canonical source of a location, but we want to start rendering work items within the context where they're linked as much as possible so that you can more or less reduce context switching. So that's just something to think about from a UX standpoint.
Ironically enough, I did talk to one customer who found that you can find requirements in the issues thing, and they were super thrilled that they could add labels to the requirements finally. So they were like, yay, that. And the biggest thing was they go, but boo, you got rid of the drawer. We really like the drawer. So
yeah,
there you go. I mean, that's
yeah. The problem is that you can also add due dates, time spent,
Right.
weight. You can lock the conversation even though there isn't one. Like, yeah, it's a bit of a mess. So I would also vote to remove them from the issue list for now, take the heat, and maybe fast follow. And I also like the drawer, and I thought that maybe at some stage, you know, the new work item view would incorporate something similar. For those who are interested, there are two objects on the back end. They're kept in sync, such that if you make a change to the requirement, it's copied to its corresponding issue. And if you make a change to the issue, it's copied to the corresponding requirement. And unfortunately, that includes the closed status. And that's why it's a problem, really, is that you can go into an issue and close the issue requirement, and it will somehow also close the requirement, and that's just not something people expect. So yeah, that's why my vote is to remove them from issue list for now, and then maybe circle back later.
But we still keep the test cases within issues list, is it?
Test cases have always been built more on the issue primitive than requirements. If you look at how they operate and like how they look, I don't know how they're done under the hood, but I know that from a user perspective, they're much more akin to the issuable or issue. I agree with requirements. We should fix or backpedal for now, and I'm happy to take the heat for that one just so we get it right, because right now I think it's causing more problems than good. It does show us where we want to go though, which is nice. Test cases, I think, are a bit more open-ended. I could go either way on those, and I think whatever is going to cause us less grief from the engineering side, I don't want to delay anything unnecessarily. So if there's one way that's a faster way to develop, if we isolate it, we can move quicker, then I think we should isolate them. If we can move quicker if they're together, then I'm fine with keeping them together. But the resultant is what enables us to move quickly and gives us less errors, because what we don't want to do is have to go fighting bugs. I don't want to roll something half out like we kind of did for requirements and then have to field 6 or 7 questions, which takes up everybody's time. So I'm fine either way, whatever makes the most sense.
Yeah, but if we do choose to keep test cases within issues list and then allow users to navigate to test case page from issues list, then they'll be able to see all the things which are not supported on test cases, be it discussions and all the attributes on the sidebar.
No, they just redirect. In the case of test cases, if you try to visit it at an issue link, it redirects to the quality/test cases ID link, which just supports the things that test cases support. Nevertheless, I still don't think it makes the other two criteria. I don't think it makes a lot of sense in the issue list. So yeah, I would vote to take them out of the issue list for now, but I'm open to dissenting opinions.
Yeah. And the thing is, go ahead. Yeah, so I was saying that the GraphQL response that we get from the issues query, regardless of what type enum that we have passed with that query, the response contains web URLs, which are all issue URLs. So even if the underlying object is of type test case, the web URL would still point to the issues URL for that particular test case.
I don't think that's accurate, Kushal. I think so. Test case is the one that's a little bit different, and we're doing the same thing with tasks in web URL. The web URL for test case goes to the test case URL, and same with tasks, where everything else, including requirements, goes to the issues URL.
Okay, yeah, if that's already coming in correct in the query response, then I think we are fine. We can just keep the filter to not include requirements in the issues list, but leave the test cases alone. So.
Yeah, I think we should, just because it'll add more complication to remove it, and we already have it within the issues list. and then in the future, maybe when test cases become a work item similar to tasks, we can determine what we want to show in the issues list. Honestly, I prefer like if we had an issues list or a work item type list specifically, then we just go to the URL with those things already filtered out. So as a query param, just include the type name there, but we can kind of decide that in the future.
I mean, I think with this underscores though, is we have to have a way for each of these underlying types, bitmask something, where we can go through and turn on and off specific features based on what type they are. And I know that that's sort of in the works, but it underscores the need to make sure we have that well designed, well understood, and a path forward for implementation. Because if you click on a requirement, we should not be able to do certain things, and we know that. But we want to make this as generic as possible, because if somebody wants to copy between different types in the future, it'd be much easier to like overlay a bitmask or something than fight with having to update 20 different parameters to the right values and fix the code in 10 different places. If you just over the top a bitmask that says it's now an issue, here's your bitmask, boom, done. And then every time you go to do something, it says, am I allowed to do that based on this mask? It's a very quick and easy way to keep that in sync, if that makes sense to anybody. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the plan was to do the back end sort of and design it that way, and then eventually layer on the UI to allow customers to do it themselves,
Right.
Where they want. So it is important to keep that in mind as we build this out, because we're trying to do the MVC approach, which is no UI and do it just for us. But then we do want to allow customers to sort of be able to create new work item types and then specify which widgets they want to use for that work item type, and then also be able to switch between types seamlessly. And I did ask UBS how they wanted to, anyway, how they wanted to handle that, or what their expectations were whenever you switch types. And they kind of noted, as long as if you delete data, maybe for a new type that doesn't support the widget that's on the current type, at least just leave a system note logging that it was removed or whatever, instead of, and that way there's an audit trail, but it would help solve some of that like problem of data retention when you switch types and there's widgets that aren't supported, all that other stuff. So
Let's see. Nick, did you get a chance to verbalize your comment?
Oh, I was just gonna note that, like, as part of the greater inconsistencies of these things, like, yeah, like you can, it's just kind of weird from a user perspective that you can see test cases, but you can't create them from that view, but you can create the other two kinds using the like type selector. Apparently the design team found that there was this type selector this morning. There's a whole discussion as to why that existed in the new issue view. There's just, yeah, it's sort of an odd experience. It's also the current experience, so people have learned to live with it, but we should avoid that when we get to work items for sure.
All right, yeah. So we'll need to think about that, because that's kind of, it's going to be a similar case with work items, in that you will be able to view tasks within the issue list, but you won't be able to create a task from within the create issue view.
that's just temporary until we have the work item view built out enough with the same inputs that the current create issue form has. That's
a task will be able, a task will still be able to be a standalone kind of work item, right? It doesn't have to be related to another issue or something like that.
No, it doesn't. We're not, I don't think so. I think there's going to be rules around the hierarchy in terms of what can be a child of what, or what can be parented, but that doesn't mean that something can't exist without being a parent. I just think it would be specified if I create a standalone task. The only thing I can associate to from a parent standpoint is whatever the hierarchy rules dictate. I think I had the next point. The one thing with the requirements moving over that this did point out is the only like really conflict that I see. There may be more. So, but one of them is like a work item gets closed and a requirement gets archived. And I'm thinking about this. I'm wondering if we should transition work items to being archived in the long run. Right, because like right now, the reason why you close an issue is to say that it's done. But part of the problem with that is that you can close an issue without it being done, right? If it's duplicated, if it's moved, if it's whatever. So these all show up also in reports and things like that, which leads to inaccuracies because more or less saying, hey, we completed all these things, but there's no way to tell if it's complete or incomplete. That's sort of the whole onus behind the configurable statuses, where what we'll be able to support with that is sort of, you'll have open and closed, which are states, right? And then within each state, there's sort of different buckets of statuses, like inactive, active, completed, and incomplete. And so what will eventually happen is, and the reason why we want to have all these be open in the open state is because there's sometimes where you have multiple teams working on the same issue and they want to put the work item through different workflows. So think about a dev team that goes through, ready for dev and dev, ready for review, and then it gets handed off to another team. They want to be able to have like a burnout chart that represents their workflow. You can't do that if everything's based on just the close state. There's lots of nuanced problems with that, but one of the interesting things that this does solve for us, if we wanted to use it, is that you could maybe set some of the completed or incomplete statuses to auto archive an issue, but for cases like where a requirement or something like that, it would keep it open the whole time. And that way we sort of could move towards this, like archived is where we sort of hide things away. And then you just have sort of everything in open state. It's what linear does pretty well, and it's sort of nice. So that's just one way we could go about solving it. I'm not sure if anyone else has a better suggestion. But we also want to think about archiving for things like we're doing archiving for iteration cadences. I think we eventually want to have archiving for labels. So it could be like a fairly consistent end state if we want to work towards that.
Yeah, I think configurable statuses is pretty cool. Like if it's fully configurable, but we have defaults for certain. I mean, we're going to have default, right? You have to have defaults.
Yeah.
Because we have types that we're defining that need defaults.
Yeah, for all of this stuff, we're going to have defaults and default types and default statuses. And then longer term, we're going to kind of package defaults into different templates, whether it's like safe or less or different methodology. And then when you're onboarding and setting up GitLab, you say, hey, we're following this methodology, and we can automatically generate more or less like their whole structure, planning structure, the parent-child rules for hierarchies, your statuses, your blah, blah, and then they can go in and tweak the knobs and the dials if they want. That's like long term. But yes, we will always ship with some sort of defaults, and we'll fall back to our product principles, which are, ship the defaults based on what we use, and then let customers go from there.
I mean, an interesting thing to think about is there is a difference between archive and closed. And I've seen this in a couple of project management type softwares where closed means it's been closed within the latest milestone. At the end of the milestone, you archive everything. And this is a really handy way of figuring out what happened during a specific time frame. Because if you search everything closed, that means it was closed during this iteration, cadence, milestone, whatever you want to label that chunk of work. And if it's archived, even if it was done previously. And I know that a lot of customers struggle with that concept as well. Not saying we want to make it complicated like that, but it's just a thought that I have heard customers ask, how do I know it was closed this milestone versus last milestone? The answer is filtering for us, but that's not always obvious. So just something else to kind of think about.
It's also not always obvious just on that basis either. Like we get a list of bugs as EMs to put in the release post at the end of the month, but it's still a list of like closed bugs. I still don't know if they were done or not. I have to go in and see, was it just closed or because we're not going to do it, or was it closed because it was finished, right? So yeah, there's definitely like that, and also the ability to use this information in burn down charts would be the two big payoffs for me from this. Like,
I mean, from what I'm used to, there's completed, there's closed, and then there's archived. Completed means the work is done. Closed means the work was not done. And at some stage, we closed it without doing the work. And archive means it was done in a previous iteration. Like, so that's sort of the history that I was used to when I came to GitLab. I'm not saying it's right, just saying that that's sort of another perspective on how some people are working.
Closed could be a status, incomplete status. And then our current closed, which closes the thing, the state closed, maybe that would be archived, or maybe we just evolved the state to be the status. and then we have a separate archive thing. I'm not sure.
Something
But-
to think about, because I've heard a lot of people, like Farnoosh was complaining about this a lot during release post time, is just because it's closed doesn't mean we did the work. We could have gotten halfway through 3 MRs, we're done on it, and we realized we didn't want to do it, so we just closed it. But it was never released. It's not done. It was closed with no action. So it's very hard when you're not intimately involved, like John's point. If you're not intimately familiar, you don't really know if closed means done or not done. It's amorphous. I feel that would be a huge can of worms for us, Gabe.
I've thought about it a lot. In
Okay,
my
good.
head, it sounds like it. I think I worked it out in my head, but the practical, I don't know if it'll stand the test of engineer scrutiny. So that'll be the next fun part.
And this is going to be one of those situations where we can't please everyone. So
Yeah.
Yeah, and you want to verbalize that?
Yeah, I haven't thought further about this, but I was just wondering if there is anything what would block us to add actually more states if it's desired, like you mentioned, completed or archived. I mean, I'm just thinking if there is some blocker why we couldn't add it now to the current 2 states which are open and closed. Maybe there are, I'm just not sure if there is actually a blocker or if it would help.
Are you saying that you think there might not be any blockers to just doing this?
I don't know, but it might be worth investigation. I mean, from what I know about now, we are quite strict on backend side to just not rely on specific backend states, like we would check statically if it's closed or open. And we use a state machine. So it might be quite easy to extend this with additional states, maybe.
Are states and statuses the same thing? Because I tried to like maybe I over-engineered in my head because I was thinking that we didn't want to introduce any breaking changes necessarily. Anyway, we can talk about this offline, but if it's not a big deal, this is like up next on our direction page is a configurable status things, because the basic premise is once you have a work item and then we introduce these statuses, and they're sort of configurable and that stuff works out, and they're categorized by inactive, active, completed, and incomplete. Then we expose a mechanism so customers can put them into a workflow, right? Which is the progression work item would go through. But then we can measure things like time spent waiting for work items in aggregate, like on value stream reports, active time, so how much time is actually being worked on this based on the statuses. And then for different work item types, we can use the value stream analytics backend to calculate the average time it takes for a work item once it gets picked up by an engineer till it's done. And then eventually even like surface the expected completion time, right? Directly within a work item view, depending on some of these like details and things like that. So it's a little bit more nuanced than just a state machine, but however the engineers think we can accomplish the same outcome, I am all ears, and we can do it whenever we want, because it's sort of like a very pivotal thing, first step for building workflows in GitLab, which I'm doing an opportunity canvas on. So anybody's interested.
Yeah, I think configurability will be completely different, and different field would be needed. I was referring just strictly to extending statically defined set of states we now use, which are open and closed. Yeah.
So we could maybe add archive, or
yeah, perhaps. At least I cannot think of a blocker. It's off the top of my head. So we may find some, but if it's needed, I think it's definitely worth further investigation.
The fact that we accidentally added closed to requirements makes me think that there might actually not be that many blockers, like that the system just respected that state and didn't cause us any errors or problems. And I don't know. I know it's the other way around. We actually want it on issues and on the work items instead of on the requirement specific object, but I don't know. We have to do a spike, right? Cool. In the interest of time, we've only 10 minutes left, so maybe we could park that and move on. Natalia left something read-only. Current work item assignee state. We have some issues with overriding GitLab UI token selector component behavior and styles. We'll probably need to contribute to GitLab UI to make our implementation less hacky. Cool. Anyone got more context on that? I don't really understand it.
Yeah, there's this token selector component, but it doesn't have things like an empty state, which we kind of need in our implementation, and it doesn't have the ability to sort of manipulate the tokens within the selector directly. So we want to do things like hiding the like a remove button on a token when in like a read-only mode or something like that. So some of those things just don't really exist today, and she and I have been kind of going back and forth on how to merge the current capabilities in the UX.
Cool, thanks. I'm going to mark this next item as read-only because maybe somebody could help me out with like collecting materials for where we've made decisions about work items. And I mean both like architectural decisions and product decisions, because I think like it's becoming like a little confusing for people joining, say, spikes where we're spiking something to do with work items. I know we have architecture blueprints. I know we have an issue with where we've discussed certain things, but I don't see where we've collected all these together. So if you have any thoughts or anything, please just add them to this part of the agenda, or even ping me directly and I'll build a handbook page or something for it. But it'd be good to have them in one spot. Unless anyone has strong feelings about that, I'm just going to race on to the next item because we've only a few minutes left. Like do like a Zoom emoji or something if you have strong opinions about that one.
This is more of a product related requirements rather than engineering technical decisions, or both?
Both.
Okay.
I mean, like, is there somewhere central that we're collecting things like we've just, like, for example, we just designed the widgets API to deal with the fact that we need parent-child hierarchies. Should we put that somewhere to make it more visible to people, or is it sitting like nested deep in an MR somewhere in a conversation? You know, things like these, like, I don't know the answer, and so I'm not criticizing one way or the other. I just think that, like, or decisions about things like in the first iteration, issues will only parent tasks and it will be one level deep. Like, is that an easy decision is it easy to find the single source of truth for that decision, or do you have to like spelunk through discussions in issues and epics that look like they're named very similarly? So yeah, it's the reason I ask is that, like, in future we're going to spike a lot of these things, I think, on the product planning side anytime we want to introduce something. And so it's much faster to do that if you can access all the decisions that were made along the way. And we've also made a couple of mistakes already along the way here, and we've had to go and try and find where the decision was made. So I think it would just be easier if there was one single place where all this stuff was documented very simply and briefly, you know. But that may already be the case, and that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I don't think it's the case, but I'd suggest, especially with work items, that we surface that in top pest epic rather than handbook. It feels like a nightmare to go back to the handbook and edit it every time that you kind of make a change, because it's in development. A lot of the time you just change on the fly because something doesn't work out. So you need to add yet another restriction or yet another requirement. So I kind of feel like the description of the topmost epic with links to the specific issues would be the best place. But yeah, let's discuss that, I guess.
Cool. All right. Thanks. So the second item I have is kind of related to that. Yeah, I'm also like, I'm trying to investigate why some mistakes are made over the time that we've been designing these features. And I think that, like, it's very common here in the async kind of environment to use like language kind of to use common terminology for things and interchangeable words for the same things, and then they're sometimes also used for other things. I came up with a couple of examples. Like during Epic Links, we changed the name about 4 times, or we didn't change the name, but we settled on a name from what various people were calling it. And then also with confidential notes, although it was a little more strict, we decided to change the name from confidential notes. But with work items in particular, I think it's pretty pronounced. So what I'm proposing is like we capture this somewhere in the handbook or something, and we agree on a set of terminology for work items that we'll use here on out. Like, so I'll give you one that I do like all the time when I'm talking to people is I say like one day epics will be issues, right? Epics will never be issues. What I mean by that is epics will be moved to the issues table to be part of to become work items, right? And it's this kind of like, maybe it's just me, like, and I'm the source of all the confusion, but I think it's probably just common enough to make use ambiguous language. So what I'm thinking is like we capture this somewhere, right? And we just have a bunch of agreed terms, and we try to only use those terms. So if we're talking about the legacy issues list, we call it the legacy issues list or the issues list, but we agree on a term for that. And the work items list, when it comes, is something different again. The work items view is something clearly different from the legacy issue view, right? And we had that problem this month where we accidentally built the component on the wrong view because I guess it's possible we're interchanging these terms. So yes, like I'm open to any thoughts. Where should this page go? Do you think this is not a good idea or pedantic or whatever, too much effort? Fine. But yeah, any feedback?
I think it would make a lot of sense. As you kind of like heard earlier, Nick had to explain what type was and what that field was on the task view, right? Which is the new work item view. And if it's my only suggestion was putting it on that work items page. So that way, if we're in an MR, if we're talking in Slack or whatever, it's sort of in this more official place instead of like a team handbook page. And it would be more, it seems like efficiency for the right group comes to mind. It would be easier to share that out, and it's also would be a little bit more discoverable for anybody who happens to stumble across work item stuff when looking at development docs. But I like standardizing on names. I think it's really important. Sid would also agree too. That's like the first thing he like hounds on is what are we going to call it and what's its name, right? Because it does bring that clarity that we need.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion. In my opinion, I didn't see this page as a candidate, but I think it's probably the best one.
Yeah, I was going to, we have a couple more minutes, I guess. Is there anything else? So I was going to say about the breaking things and so on. I'd like us all, and especially like for myself, I defer to as engineers or engineering to push back a bit more when we introduce these kind of changes, like the displaying different items in the issue list, to go greenfield as much as possible so that we don't change current behavior in any way. I know it's like tempting, especially for me as engineer, because we do some backend code and everything just works out of the box, so to say, because they're like, it's not that difficult to show all the types, but it usually has like consequences that we don't think about in the UX, UI, and so on. So I'm thinking, I know it's more work usually to do the greenfield stuff because you kind of have to at least maintain 2 different states of the same thing for a period of time, but it feels like we would break less things for the customers. It makes it more difficult for us, but easier and less confusing for the customer. So yeah, I just like at the team level, can we try and do, because like we've seen already a couple of instances of that with the cadences, iterations, with the work items issue list. And I think if we think about that, we'll find a few more of those. So yeah, just as a topic to think about.
Yeah, fully agreed. I think the issues list, these items appearing in the issues list was specifically a regression. It wasn't intended ever to happen. And there are a few things we could retrospect at the end of 15.1 to figure out like why that happened and what we could do in future to avoid it. But I take your general point that we should be trying to build more, like not disrupt what people are already using.
Yeah, like even with the tasks, I know it's working and everything like that, but I feel like it would have maybe been somewhat better to keep the issues list as is, and maybe I could add an work items list that will now have included the tasks and the issues. And then from there, even if you break it, you kind of don't affect the old workflows, and people can go back and do their stuff the old way as we develop and iterate on something new, right? So yeah, just in those in kind of those terms to think maybe moving forward.
Cool, thank you. If there are no further comments, then I think we can probably stop here. We're 2 minutes over, so that's pretty good considering the length of discussion at the beginning. Cool. All right, thanks everyone.